And now to hear that he has taken a role with a prominent conservative-oriented lobbying firms is exceptionally bad.
I'm Lindsay, and this is a News for You live stream by Freedom Media WA. And there are many things worth sharing, and this is one of them. Why? Because you won't find legacy mainstream media bringing you this type of detail. Do you remember when former West Australian State Daddy Mark McGowan held the impromptu press conference back in May this year with legacy mainstream media, and he made the following remark?
Today I'm announcing that I'll be stepping down as Premier and as member for Rockingham. I was elected as Premier of Western Australia in March 2017, more than 6 years ago now. The truth is I'm tired, extremely tired. In fact, I'm exhausted.
On his final day in office, Mark McGowan found himself once again surrounded by mouthpieces from the legacy mainstream media, sharing light-hearted moments and gesturing about not running them over. During that encounter, Mark McGowan uttered these parting words.
What does your immediate future hold, Premier? Do you have a long holiday coming up, or is it straight back into some other line?
I don't have any plans. I'm going to watch some Netflix, do some walking. Our dog's going to get a lot of walking. So I don't have any plans. So I'm going to go back to being an ordinary person. That is my ambition, just to be an ordinary person and just live an ordinary life.
Now, as we reflect on Mark McGowan ending his tenure as Premier abruptly, no one within the circles that should have had a finger on the pulse, and that's legacy mainstream media, saw it coming. With the current challenges facing West Australians, including the significant cost of living crisis, you would have well thought Mark McGowan is well insulated from these ordinary person financial pressures. Many citizens are holding in their belts and cutting back on both necessities like putting basic food on the table and luxuries like Netflix. So it raises the question, surely Mark McGowan's personal Netflix account hasn't been affected given his substantial annual benefit of $274,867 from you, the West Australian taxpayer, via his funded parliamentary scheme guaranteed every year for the rest of his life.
Money, 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 must be funny in the rich man's world.
In case you missed it, just over a week ago, some startling developments regarding Mark McGowan has surfaced. The once fatigued state daddy, who bid farewell to his well-paying position as Premier, has raised eyebrows as he's ventured into considerably more lucrative roles within the corporate sector, a move that places him in close proximity to individuals he once regulated. Mark McGowan will now find himself knocking on the doors of his former parliamentary colleagues, potentially seeking favourable outcomes for companies that now line his pockets. And wait, there is more to this story, and it's a figure that's hard to ignore, and you're about to learn the number of the day. It's not one job, it's...
The number of the day scheduled to arrive. The number of the day is 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
You heard that right? 5 lucrative positions. I really don't want to add salt into the still fresh wounds that Mark McGowan has inflicted on West Australians during his authoritarian rule, but many knew the moments his lips were moving when he announced that he was quitting politics, his reasoning simply didn't add up. And we know legacy mainstream media won't shed light on the I'm exhausted Mark McGowan's corporate affiliations, so I'll do my best to set out what I've discovered. And I'll begin with BHP. Back in early October 2021, Mark McGowan announced those working in the resource sector would require 2 stamps in the human rights infringing newly created passport system to go to the shops, the movies, the bottle shop or the pub, or inhumanely, even to get basic medical treatment. It's no coincidence that during the same week Mark McGowan announced the stamp requirement, BHP was in the headlines with this. Mark McGowan's guaranteed sweetheart deal to provide the number of stamps needed for the BHP West Australian operations and its personnel was a weaponized plan, and only now you can see the extent of the coercion. Notably, BHP was also the last major mining company to lift the stamp requirement for any worker here in Western Australia. Moving on, Mark McGowan's lucrative job number 2 is with Mineral Resources. In this role, Mark McGowan will be collaborating with Chris Ellison, the Managing Director of Mineral Resources based here in Western Australia. And it's worth noting that back in September 2020, Chris Ellison joined Australia's exclusive Billionaires Club and holds an estimated stake in the mineral resource company valued at a staggering $264 million. At the same time as Mark McGowan announced that he's suddenly quitting politics because he was tired, Chris Ellison shared the following internal memo and made public comment regarding Mark McGowan's resignation. Quote, "During the pandemic and throughout his premiership, Mark McGowan led a government focused on solving problems and working with businesses to get things done. Yada, yada, yada. And I'm confident Mark McGowan will continue to make a big contribution outside the political arena, and I wish him all the best in his next stage of his career." The exact timing of Chris Ellison's approach to Mark McGowan for this job remains a closely guarded secret. But in keeping with Mark McGowan's reputation for his gold standard in transparency, which he displayed during his tenure as Premier, in retrospect it appears that Ellison's approach in that public memo was remarkably well founded. In the corporate world, large companies typically have a nomination committee, and that committee is responsible for matters of corporate governance. The leader of this committee holds a responsibility of identifying and recommending potential new board members. Mark McGowan's strong admiration for China is no secret. In June 2021, the West Australian, a newspaper favoured by McGowan and one that favours him, ran the headline during a time that Prime Minister Scott Morrison visited here, Perth, Western Australia, where McGowan made it explicitly clear that he believes his views on how Australia, not just Western Australia, but Australia, should manage its geopolitical relationships with China. In April 2023, just months before McGowan quit as State Daddy, he travelled to China on the WA public purse, knowing at the time that he had already made his mind to quit. And it's no surprise that legacy mainstream media failed to employ their journalistic charter and probe Mark McGowan on why he would travel to China when he knew that his mindset wasn't up to international diplomatic relationships. Even when Mark McGowan waved the following significant insight in front of legacy mainstream media, they continued with their softball answers. Let's have a look.
And did you come to this decision earlier this year in the lead up to the budget, or?
Yeah, it was a few months ago, but I had to do the budget. You might recall I went to China and.
After Mark McGowan's controversial visit to China, the West Australian featured a story in which the Federal Foreign Affairs Minister Penny Wong stopped short of actually saying directly that Mark McGowan might have compromised Australia's position geopolitically with China. There was plenty of commentary at the time in press media that Mark McGowan ventured outside his lane and was beyond his realm of expertise in this space. Why mentioning all this and why is it relevant? Well, bear with me while I lay a little bit more detail out and you decide. Comment below if you think what I'm outlining now is in fact plausible. Mark McGowan will be working with CC, who is an independent non-executive director at Mineral Resources. And I'll leave CC to tell you a little bit about what she does at Mineral Resources.
I'm chairman of the nomination committee. I have a very global outlook because I've worked in many different places around the world. I worked in Shanghai and then also worked in Hong Kong. I worked with a variety of private companies and also state-owned companies. So I was able to be that bridge between China and the West and to guide them in their acquisition processes and to see where we could make contributions. By bringing that knowledge, I'm able to guide MinRes in the future. I'm able to read behind the headlines and give a real understanding of what's happening in China. The experience in China has allowed me to share my experience and guide mineral resources in this area.
CC served as a director of a company associated with the $2 billion equity fund, the Shanghai International Group. And interestingly, this fund, which has a focus on precious metals, does not directly engage with the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Instead, it uses its responsibilities to deal with precious metals under one of its partnership companies called CME Group. Shortly following Mark McGowan's somewhat mystifying visit to China, many may recall a live stream where I shed light on the less than impressive management of the gold supply from Perth Mint to the Shanghai Gold Exchange. Remembering, under West Australian law, it's Mark McGowan who was the person responsible for the Perth Mint on behalf of the West Australian taxpayers' public coffers. He was the person at the centre of this debacle. And by now, you're not alone in thinking there remains many more questions and answers regarding the connections of both CC and McGowan to China. Job number 3, Mark McGowan will join Bondi Partners, a prestigious international investment firm founded in Washington, DC in early 2020 by none other than former Australian Ambassador to the United States and former Federal Liberal Treasurer Joe Hockey. You might recall Joe Hockey was the Treasurer who delivered a crippling budget to Australian people and famously celebrated with a cigar shortly after his budget speech nearly a decade ago. Let's have a look.
Morning, mate.
A casual early morning walk by the lake. Come Tuesday night, many might want Joe Hockey and the Finance Minister to go jump in it. A debt tax, increased fuel prices, welfare cuts, changes to the pension, up to 3,000 tax office jobs to go. As the government continues the uphill battle, trying to deny new or increased taxes, break an election promise, at the end of a tough week with an even tougher one ahead, time out for the Treasurer and his right-hand man, Finance Minister Cormann.
Job number 4 sees Mark McGowan joining APM Group, a company established right here in Perth by one person, an occupational therapist, Megan Wynne. APM Group is now Australia's largest provider of disability employment services, holding massive contracts with the federal government. Embedded within its glossy company documents, APM spruiks it is committed to delivering the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals aiming to end poverty while increasing health, justice and prosperity for people. Which brings me to this interesting point. Mark McGowan's record in health, justice and prosperity management over the past 3 years has largely been obscured due to his lack of the gold standard of transparency he promised. Surely this track record competes with APM's core values. It seems that they are quite happy to turn a blind eye to his past breaches of health, justice and prosperity. But remembering, he prevented people from leaving WA and he prevented West Australian people from returning back to WA. In the financial year 2023, APM Group reported a staggering $1.8 billion turnover and a 43% increased revenue turnover compared to the previous year. It boasts over $6 million in assets and an organic revenue growth increase of $183.2 million. All of this at a time when funding cuts and large-scale service delivery cuts have left many within the NDI system in desperate need of support. And there is no immediate pathway that's been set out as to how the system is going to be fixed. Mark McGowan won't be alone at morning tea, as he'll have plenty of opportunity to reminisce about his days as State Daddy with Ben Wyatt. Wyatt, the former State Labor Treasurer and Aboriginal Affairs Minister, the person who played a significant role in crafting Western Australia's controversial Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Laws, the 2021 Act, which are still yet to be repealed. And Wyatt joined APM in July 2022 after leaving politics in March 2021. He took on non-executive director roles with Woodside Petroleum and Rio Tinto, all announced in June 2021. APM's Chief Executive Officer is a person called Michael Angie, a Perth-based mover and shaker in the circles of the big end of town. His wife, Sandy Angie, is a long-standing councillor of the City of Perth who this weekend will be going head-to-head with Basil Zemplis for the role of Lord Mayor. No wonder Basil wasn't invited to a number of black tie events in the City of Perth held by Mark McGowan. Poor old Basil seems to be likely fighting the pillow talk by Sandy to her husband Michael and then closed-door chit-chat between Michael and McGowan. Poor old Basil appears to have some powerful and well-funded connected political axe grinders surrounding around him. So lastly, job number 5. Just last week, it's been reported again in the McGowan Favour publication that on top of his 4 high-profile and undoubtedly busy jobs, you can now book Mark McGowan for a speaking engagement via Claxton Speakers International with a fee of $15,000 plus per appearance. And I'll say this, I'm tired and exhausted just telling you all about Mark McGowan's new jobs, but I'll force myself to go on for a little bit longer, which leads me to this pressing question. Is it time for some form of legislative mechanism to regulate the movement of state and federal politicians and bureaucrats through the revolving doors of Parliament into lucrative corporate positions, a phenomenon colloquially referred to as job for the boys? Jeffrey Watson, Senior Counsel from the Centre of Public Integrity, he certainly believes so. So to conclude this stream, I'm going to share some more of his insights on this matter.
The perceptions created by this are completely wrong. The fact is that you're a Premier who takes on this valuable job with one of the major participants in the Western Australian economy only months after you've ceased in the role of Premier. It's just bizarre to me. But also you need to find out when the first negotiations, when the first approaches were made. I'm not sure, did Mr McGowan leave his job because he knew that he had this offer on the cards? The suggestion that Labor politicians get into bed with big business is also one which I find odd. And now to hear that he has taken a role with a prominent conservative-oriented lobbying firms is exceptionally bad. That is just wrong. That should be regulated, and former politicians should be prevented from entering lobbying roles until a period of time has expired.
Brought to you by Freedom Media WA, where journalism should never be a government narrative.